Hello, everybody. It's really nice to see all of you. And I think that we have most of our panelists on board as well, scrolling through the windows here. So thank you all for taking the time to be here. Many of you know me already, but my name is Allison Uyeda. I'm a third-year internal medicine resident, and I am one of the co-chairs of Mentorship and Wellness for our Resident Diversity Committee. And I am joined on this presentation by Gabby Paras. I'll let her introduce herself briefly as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm also one of the co-chairs for the Mentorship and Wellness for the RDC. I'm Gabby. I'm one of the R2s, and I'm happy to be here. And I hope that you're all excited for this presentation today.
And we'll take a couple of minutes to talk a little bit more about RDC and what we do as a group in a few minutes. But I just want to start again by welcoming everyone to this session that's really squarely dedicated towards the topic of mentorship during residency, something that I think is important to all of us and takes on different forms and shapes throughout our training. We really want to make sure as the RDC Mentorship and Wellness co-chairs that mentorship is something that is accessible to residents and then also something that reflects different life experiences and scholarly interests. We're really excited to be joined by 8 different panelists today who are going to share more about their personal stories and how this has shaped both their professional identity and ongoing academic interests. I guess one disclaimer before I start, if able, it's always nice to have your video turned on when people are sharing a personal story about themselves. I think it's nice to be able to see who your audience is. So both panelists and resident attendees, if possible, please keep your videos on for this presentation. Starting off with disclosures, I have no financial disclosures per usual. And then the next thing that I'll talk about is just a brief intro into RDC. RDC is something that many of you may already be familiar with. It's our Resident Diversity Committee, which is a resident-led organization focused on fostering diversity and inclusion within our internal medicine residency program. This group was founded on the conviction that diversity among physicians makes us all better practitioners and leaders and ultimately leads to better patient care. Our mission as RDC is to help mitigate the effects of institutionalized bias against individuals for their gender, race, sexual orientation, and or religion. And RDC is comprised of a really wonderful group of residents, our peers who are really passionate about creating a more inclusive training environment and also educational opportunities. And we think that these things help improve our care for patients, particularly those who may experience social marginalization. And these photos here are just a small compilation of some events that we had with our RDC members. I have here a quick overview of the multiple subcommittees that comprise RDC. Each of these has a group of co-chairs who's doing really amazing work in their own sphere. Our recruitment chairs have done an incredible job helping to recruit and retain diverse residents to our program, particularly those who identify as underrepresented in medicine. And we learned this year that our incoming categorical track, 37% identify as underrepresented in medicine, which is our highest percentage to date. We also have some really amazing curriculum chairs who are doing a lot of ongoing work to develop more formal educational opportunities in the realm of equity, diversity, and inclusivity. And those range from large-scale efforts such as our health equity pathway to smaller things such as this academic half-day presentation and other similar opportunities as well. And then I know we have at least 1 or 2 members of our research subcommittee on, and they do really incredible work that helps recognize EDI as an integral part of evidence-based medicine. And I know that applications recently were opened for our annual research grant that helps promote student research and resident research on work in this realm. And then finally, As I mentioned briefly already, Gabby and I are the co-chairs for Mentorship and Wellness. And our objectives in this realm are sort of twofold. The first is to help create a sense of community and create safe and open spaces for dialogue within our residency. And then the other component of that, which is the focus of our presentation today, is really fostering mentorship opportunities and helping to make sure that residents find mentors who are accessible and who maybe reflect residents' own personal and professional identities. So we're always working to help improve opportunities in that realm. And that brings me to today's session, which is a mentorship panel. And I think that the nidus behind this event was really formed from a compilation of different conversations and experiences that we have had over the last few years. Many of you may be familiar with RAMP, the Residency Advising Mentorship Program, also a resident-run group that helps identify and pair residents with faculty mentors, usually in a subspecialty or other field of interest. And so we've been collaborating with them to try to learn more about what we can do to improve mentorship for our residents. And we were lucky to complete and sort of administer a residency-wide needs assessment at the end of the last academic year. And this was a survey that demonstrated a couple notable things to us. One is that globally, residents felt that there are opportunities for us to improve structured mentorship in our program. A couple things that stuck out to me were that residents felt like they often needed a self-starter mentality in order to connect with mentors and sort of maintain those connections longitudinally over time. And then the other thing that we noted on a few occasions was that residents really wanted to be able to connect with mentors who maybe were outside of just their immediate sphere, whether that sphere be their continuity clinic or their intended field of interest. They wanted to be able to identify and work with mentors who maybe shared other identities or affiliations outside of those, and also working towards building a more diverse pool of mentors. And then, last, and I think importantly, one of the things that came out of this needs assessment is that residents are really interested in incorporating more near-peer mentorship opportunities. And I think that can look like resident to student mentorship, resident to resident, or even more connections with our fellows who are sort of able to commiserate, have been through similar experiences, and are sort of freshly out of the fellowship application process. And so that's something that we're working with fellowship directors to try to incorporate more of moving forward. And we're really happy to have one of our very own fellows joining us on the panel today. So that's sort of a review of what was the impetus for today's session. I do have a few learning objectives for us to reflect on. I think that first would be our goal to connect residents, fellows, and faculties, members with diverse backgrounds and academic interests. I recognize that academic half day covers a wide audience. There are interns on this call, R2s, R3s who are right on the cusp of finishing their training. And I know that some of you may be at that point in your training where you're still considering different career paths, still looking for mentors, maybe considering at a fundamental level what mentorship means to you. And I really hope that for those of you who are here, this session can help provide a little bit more insight into what different people are doing at our institution and help you connect with potential mentors. And then I also know that several of you on the call are R3s in your final few weeks of training, and maybe some of you have been lucky enough to have connected with mentors already who have been meaningful to you. And I do think that even if there are people here who feel pretty content with their mentorship needs already, there's a lot for us to learn simply by listening to the stories of others, reflecting on those experiences. And I really hope that this session can also serve as a platform really just to celebrate the accomplishments and the unique contributions of our panelists. And then I sort of alluded to RDC's vested interest in improving equity, diversity, and inclusivity at the University of Washington. And I think that taking time and creating space to share in mentors' experience with work in this realm and help foster relationships and mentorship opportunities for residents who might have an interest in EDI work specifically is my third goal for this session. All right. So just to give everybody an outline of the flow of events for this morning so that we're all on the same page, I am now finishing up our introduction, and then we're going to spend the bulk of our time really giving the floor to our panelists. We will have each of our 8 panelists give about a 5-minute overview in a large group setting, and then we'll take somewhere between a 5 to 10 minute break around 10 o'clock, depending on timing. And I do think that there's a decent amount of flexibility here. And then we'll end the session with breakout rooms. There'll be 2 panelists per room, some RDC facilitators, and then residents are able to assign themselves to breakout rooms to talk more with panelists that they may be interested in learning more about or connecting more with. And then at the end, we'll just make sure to rejoin as a large group so that we can say our final thanks and goodbyes all together. All right, I'm really excited to introduce our 8 panelists who are here with us this morning. I didn't do a final check to see that all 8 are here, but maybe, oh good, Javel's given me a thumbs up. We're really excited to have this group of 8 fellow and faculty members. They represent an array of different fields within medicine, represent different levels of training, and all of these individuals were nominated by our RDC members for their unique contributions to the field of medicine. And so we'll give each one the opportunity to share more about themselves in this large group setting. We asked each of our panelists to think through what their own professional journey has looked like and how it has impacted where they are currently in their career. We asked our panelists to think about how equity, diversity, and inclusivity has been a part of their personal and or professional identity. And then also just giving them the chance to share any projects or specific interests within their field that they're working on and really passionate about right now. So we're excited to have you all here. And what I'm going to do now is turn things over to Gabby. Gabby will introduce each of our panelists, give them the opportunity to share a little bit more about themselves. I think what may be easiest is for resident audience members to save questions for the small group sessions. If there's something that fits in nicely to the large group area, I think we can open the floor, but for the most part, we'll keep most questions until our small group section at the end. All right, Gabby, I'm going to tab over to our first panelist of the morning, who is Dan Cabrera.
Great. Thank you so much, Allison, for that introduction. So our first speaker today is Dr. Dan Cabrera. Dr. Cabrera is a clinical associate professor within the Division of General Internal Medicine and assistant program director for the diversity and inclusion within the Uyeda of Internal Medicine Residency. Dr. Cabrera's academic interests include medical education and equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives. Dr. Cabrera can be seen working as a hospitalist at Harborview and has been a longtime champion of RDC and has in fact helped it grow into what it is today. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Cabrera and have him speak today.
Great, thank you. I don't think I've really been introduced that much, so that was a great introduction. So I'll take it when I can get it. Thanks for letting me go first too. I just wanted to let people know I'm on ward attending right now. So I'm squeezing this in between seeing patients and dispo rounds and such. So sorry for going out of order. You know, I think when I first got introduced to the idea of equity, probably was when I was a kid. So I'm first generation only child of an undocumented Mexican woman who came to this country and didn't have a lot, and we didn't have a lot. So when I was a little kid, I got all my care, a lot of my early care and healthcare through like free clinics. I remember driving around different parts of Phoenix looking for the free vaccine clinics or the free well child checks, and those kinds of things. And I think that kind of stuck with me for a long time, as far as that there was people willing to provide that kind of care for patients that didn't have a lot. And I think that's probably the main reason I got into medicine, is because I saw myself being a provider who wanted to provide that same kind of care at some point. And then when I entered medical training, I was excited to continue to do that, but I also saw that there wasn't a lot of people that looked like me in medicine, or that represented a lot of the diversity of people in this country. And so then I kind of started to think about not only what kind of clinical medicine I wanted to provide, but also how I wanted to see changes in who was getting the medical training. And so I think pretty early on in residency, I started trying to find ways to increase diversity. And, maybe shocking to some or not shocking to others, but there wasn't a lot of like EDI when I was into this stuff. It was just diversity. And then it was diversity and inclusion. And then it was finally, everybody calls it now what it is, which is EDI. And then, as people also are now calling it, JEDI with justice. So, and so I was involved in different diversity initiatives as a resident, and came here to the UW now 10 years ago. It's going to be 10 years in August. And I think I really wanted to continue that work. And I saw that the UW here, just like the UW where I was at before with Wisconsin, pretty much had a lot of the similar challenges and opportunities to increase diversity amongst the trainees and faculty. And so that work kind of led me to pair it with my other passion, which is medical education. And so I was given an opportunity a little over 4 years ago to become an APD with a focus on EDI. And so that continues to be my passion. And those are the two things that I enjoy working on. I'm not a researcher. I'm not looking at health inequities and health disparities on that level. And there's other people doing that. And I think that is awesome. And I'm sometimes jealous of that. But I'm also really happy with the kind of work I do, which is really educational, it's administrative, it's leadership. And so I hope to continue doing that. And, as far as like what things I'm interested in doing going forward, well, it's more of the same work. But I'm also now looking at like, yes, I think we've made some strides in increasing diversity in our residency program and our junior faculty here in the Department of Medicine. But I'd also like to see that inclusivity part kind of get better. I just don't, there's not enough time or not enough people kind of engaging in like, how do we support our diverse trainees and our diverse junior faculty once they arrive to an institution like the University of Washington. And so I'm interested in creating kind of programs that support those people because, those who are underrepresented in medicine and those even that are BIPOC just have a different experience than others when it comes into settings like this. And I'd like to see that be a better place for them. So, one of the things you'll see rolled out on a departmental level that I've been helping with is a navigator program, which will be there for staff and faculty within the Department of Medicine to come and talk to people when they've maybe experienced mistreatment or bias from patients, colleagues, supervisors, et cetera. That's one of the things, but I don't know. I'll stop talking there and I'll turn over to the next panelist, and I'm going to go run and figure out how to discharge some of my folks, and then I'll be back for the small group. So thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Cabrera, for that information. And just it was nice to learn more about you. And again, we're very, very thankful for your contributions to RDC. And so I'd like to introduce our next panelist, Dr. Crystal Brown. Dr. Brown is an assistant professor within the Division of Pulmonary Critical Care and Sleep Medicine. Dr. Brown's research focuses on racial inequities during serious illness and end of life, particularly around experiencing healthcare discrimination, receiving funding from sources including the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Dr. Brown has also worked as an ethics consultant here at Harborview. And so I'd like to introduce Dr. Brown and have them speak today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. When I was thinking about what to say about my journey, sometimes I feel a little bit emotional because it hasn't been an easy road for me. I am Black and Korean, and so you can sort of imagine the complexities that come with growing up from a mom who immigrated from Seoul to marry my dad, who is a Black man from the South, who's in the military, and we moved around a lot. And but obviously, I think it goes without saying that particularly amongst my family in Texas, I saw a lot of distressing health inequities and things of that sort that happened to them. I always sort of envisioned myself as a philosopher. I actually wanted to be a philosophy major in undergrad. I did undergrad here at UW, but was kind of really deterred for various reasons throughout my career from pursuing philosophy or bioethics until I got into fellowship. And I first was, sort of did the typical master's in epi route and really was unhappy there. And thankfully with my mentors, Randy Curtis, really encouraged me to pursue a master's in bioethics, which is what I was always interested in because I had always envisioned approaching research through an ethics lens or having my questions sort of derived from that context. I was definitely seen as out there in getting this degree in ethics. And this was also before EDI work was cool and trendy. So there were people who actually who questioned my decision to do research in this area. And I spent, after sort of an unsuccessful attempt at getting a K, sort of trying to get to what my actual research questions were in a very sort of peripheral way, I really questioned what I was doing in academic medicine. And I spent 2 years on nights in the MACU, I think probably longer than that, really thinking about whether I wanted to stay or whether I actually wanted to leave medicine completely because I felt so isolated. What I ended up doing was hiring an academic coach for women of color specifically. And she really helped me shift my mindset and shift my framework around why I wanted to do this work. And working with her and in conjunction with my mentor, Randy, actually really gave me the support I needed to pursue the questions that I wanted with my research. So I eventually was able to get a K funded through NIMHD, and then I'm also a Harold Amos Scholar now. And I guess what I will just say is that, my research questions now are, in discrimination during serious illness, how that affects the lived experience of being ill when you're racially marginalized, and how that really affects the way you process what you're hearing from clinicians, how that affects your communication. And I would say that it was a long road coming, and it does feel a little weird to have been in 2 places at once with your research interests, where at first it was like not viewed as real research and was sort of having to deal with all the microaggressions and the comments that came with that, and now all of a sudden being like the in vogue researcher where everyone wants to work with you. And I guess the last thing I will say is that I think your life experience really also helps inform your research or your work. I would say, like, as a resident and as a trainee, and even as in my early years being like a junior attending, I think it was hard to really sort of understand what it was like to feel disenfranchised by your by the healthcare system. And I really didn't appreciate that until I had my son, who's now 15 months old, where I went through, I actually have like severe postpartum, not depression, but hemorrhage, and experienced sort of like every single thing that you read about, where women are not believed or blown off, or where care is really impaired, where it could actually be life-threatening. So I haven't gone through every single thing that patients have gone through here that I've been talking to and researching, but I also think that having a little bit of life experience about what it's like to feel like the healthcare system and clinicians have betrayed you has really also like informed my work. So I've shared a lot there, but I guess I just want to be open about where I'm coming from, and I want other people to feel open about coming to me about their experiences or any hardships or difficulties that I've been through. So that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ron. That was a really inspiring personal story, and it was really great for us to hear, and I feel really honored personally. So thank you. I'd like to introduce our next panelist, Dr. Johnny Orozco. Dr. Orozco is an associate professor within the Division of Medical Oncology and the Clinical Research Division of the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center. Dr. Orozco's research involves developing more effective targeted therapies for acute myeloid leukemia and improving bone marrow transplant to be more effective and less toxic. You may also see Dr. Orozco on the inpatient leukemia service and also the bone marrow transplant service. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Orozco to speak next.
Thanks so much for having me here. And now that you know sort of where I live at the UW Medical Center, I guess the first nugget I want you all to walk away with is that it was a very circuitous path. You may hear that theme here time and time again, in that a lot of us don't always have the means or luxury or the knowledge to be able to kind of plot a very direct path from point A to point B. And I think especially for where I started at, I'm the oldest of 5 kids from immigrant parents. My parents came from Mexico, and where we grew up, the local role models were for the drug dealers, right? They're the ones that have the cars and the money, but we also knew that that was not sustainable. And so early on in high school, I knew that the way out was really just through college education. And the only thing I saw viable was engineering. And it wasn't until I was doing some summer internships at pharmaceutical companies in all over the country that I really saw the impact of research. And that's really where I really latched on to this idea that the work you do can have meaningful, impactful ramifications across the world, really depending on what you do research. And so with that in mind, I actually started in graduate school here. And the more I delved into it, the more I saw that not all the research really had a clinical impact. Some of it could be very basic, and I found that a little bit disheartening. And I think I really started to appreciate the limitations in what I've been exposed to. I hadn't heard of these physician scientist career pathways. I hadn't heard of different ways that you can accomplish research, or even the kinds of research that was out there. And so I think part of what I want to ask you is to ask questions and talk to people and go out there and see what's out there, so that you can really try to define for yourself what path you'd want to end up in. Because for me, it was really a lot of catching up sort of on the fly, which I think explains my pathway here. And so when I was in grad school, and I thought, well, what does this really matter? I don't want to do this work just so that it ends up in a journal on some shelf. It's really my way into medicine. And so I went into medical school more as a way to identify what are the cool, interesting questions that we can go after, and really focus in that space between things that you can research at your lab, at your bench, and then take it to the clinic, and then bring it back if you needed to get some more. And that was really what got me excited about staying in this academic medicine path. I think part of it is a little daunting when you look around and you don't see a lot of folks that look like you, maybe a lot of folks that may not relate to you the way we may have grown up. And I think that also became another reason why I think it's important for me to stick around and make this place a more welcoming place for people who have a different background, different trajectory. And I think that's going to ultimately benefit the institution, right? The more perspectives we bring, the more experiences, the more creative solutions, the better fixes that we're going to brainstorm. And so it was really, even during residency, it was still rather circuitous. I didn't really know exactly where I wanted to go into. And it wasn't until I latched on to mentors, really at the beginning of fellowship, that I really sort of felt more in streamline in terms of like what's the expected next stepping stone, or the next expectations. And so I think that's the other thing that I want to emphasize, that I didn't really take advantage of mentorship. I didn't really know what that meant until pretty late in my trajectory. I think it would have been less bumpy right had I taken advantage of that wisdom that was around me, but I didn't always seek. It's always hard to, what question do you have? What do you ask? You may not even know what to ask, but I think once you get to know someone and you share, this is what I think I want to do. How can I get there? What are the different ways to get there? What do I want to do to explore that? Then it becomes an easier path forward. And so I knew that I wanted to do mostly research that was clinically relevant. And so I think medical oncology does exactly that. There's so many exciting research questions that we can go after, so many different ways we can tweak it so that the patients can benefit on short term, not decades later. And that's sort of another place where I ran into a little bit of a hurdle where folks were saying, oh, here's a Latino physician. We need you in the community. There's all these needs with all these disparities out there. Maybe you could be a specialist, but in the community or in private practice. And I think I, by this time, had known myself well enough to know that as a lab rat, I really liked the research. And so I was really distraught on how do you reconcile this need, this impact that you can make in your community, people that I come from, but also not sell myself short in terms of what I want to go after and pursue at the bench. And so that's sort of how I settled on my current research interest, which is trying to address a very aggressive blood cancer and trying to do it in a way that whatever rolls out of my research, it's going to be potentially accessible to everybody out there, not just those patients who have a bone marrow donor, for example. I think a lot of people of color, we don't always have the benefit of finding a fully matched donor in the registries for a lot of reasons that we're not going to go into. But I think doing partially matched donors should be an option for everybody. Everybody has a brother or a sister or a parent or a kid, maybe that could be their donor. And so I have been able to reconcile that need with incorporating DEI into the research that I do, knowing that or being driven by the notion that whatever I do should be something that can impact the communities that have historically been ignored. And then the other part of it is within academic medicine, there's so much work to do that I also get to do other fun stuff like chairing the Committee on Minority Faculty Advancement, which is one way that we try to support the minority faculty that are here and kind of brainstorm what are the different needs, what can we do to support our faculty better. So there's a lot of different outlets like that that people can still pursue that's outside of your primary research bench to-dos. So I'll stop there and look forward to getting to meet some of the residents in different formats, even after this session today. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Orozco. That was just a great story. And it was nice to hear kind of your perspective on that balance between the needs of your community and also still wanting to continue your passion for research and academia. So that was a really great example. Our next panelist is going to be Dr. Abby Hussein. Dr. Hussein is a clinical assistant professor within the Division of Allergy and Infectious Disease and is the Associate Medical Director of Infection Prevention at Uyeda Montlake. Dr. Hussein's academic interests include medical education, anti-bias recruitment and hiring, and redefining the culture of medicine. And so I would like to invite Dr. Hussein to speak next.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Apologize in advance. My voice is usually not this lovely. I am recovering. I would like to say first, as I was reflecting on my journey, I realized that it was very short, which is kind of depressing because I feel like I've been doing this forever and I still have so far to go, but I am officially coming on my first year of finishing my first year of like adult facultiness. So that is very exciting. So I am the oldest of 4 girls. My parents moved, well, I moved from Sudan when we were about 4. So not even first generation, but just kind of jumped in over here. And as I was listening to everyone else's stories, I realized, my family's goal when they came here was to shield us so much from feeling othered that I never even recognized kind of my role or my personal identities until I got further in my training. And so it wasn't until I got to medical school when people started saying things like, oh, you sure you want to, go this route? You think academics is for you? I don't know if you're going to make it there. Those types of things that I didn't even really hear or see or get those like doubts from when I was an undergrad. And so it wasn't until I got to those spaces where I realized that my goal really was just to be visible and to kind of survive in these areas that weren't really meant for me from the beginning. And so it took me a really long time to realize how DEI kind of played in my life, not because I wasn't doing it every day, but because I just was in this mindset where I was like, oh, me being here is like different, weird. Like I never thought about that. I never questioned my journey. I never questioned my identity. I never questioned whether I belonged until I moved further up in life. And I think that is so interesting because for so many people, that story starts out much earlier. And I wonder how differently things would have turned out. But anyways, that was just me reflecting after listening to everyone's stories. So currently, I am a ID doc at UW and Harborview, and I do infection prevention. And I was not a research person, similar to Dan. And so for me to see where I could fit in academics was really difficult. And I considered leaving. I came into ID because I wanted to do global health clinical work. That was my goal. But unfortunately, as time went on, global health wasn't really funded in that clinical aspect anymore. It was more research funding in order to go do sustainable projects in other countries. And since I knew that really wasn't what I had the appetite for, I decided to get an MPH during my fellowship here, focusing kind of on global health, as well as just figuring out how I could work maybe in the future with health ministries, whether in guidelines or public health kind of options there. Stats are not my strong suit either. And so doing epidemiological work isn't what I'm good at, but I like talking to people and I like seeing how we can fix systems. And so I thought, let me have this extra little degree here and see what I can do with that. And as I was creating my role going into and attending, I think as all of you know here at UW, it is very difficult to kind of figure out how to stay within academics and how to get the appropriate funding for that. And so I tried to really do some introspection and see what could I do and what do I like that I could actually go forward doing. And I found that to be working with medical students. And so currently I'm one of the college faculty mentors. And a lot of that was because so much of the discomfort and the issues that we feel in medicine is from the environment and the culture that has been created for decades and decades and decades. It's such an old system that is so resistant to change, right? Sometimes people argue that you just need to break it down. So I wanted to figure out where can I kind of input these small changes and change people's thoughts, their idea of how medicine should be, about how we as physicians should act in this space. And so a lot of what I do is just having an open space for people to talk about their personal identities. And instead of trying to fit everyone into a box, which I think medicine has done for so long, to really allow for us to be who we are and bring our whole selves into what we do, because that changes so much, not only our perspective, but that of our patients. And so I like to call it vulnerability work. So I just spend all day being vulnerable and telling everybody how much I suck at different things so that they realize that it's okay, and trying to create that as we go through. I'm also currently working with our infectious disease division is awesome. And we have a lot of advocates in there. And so we have our own DEI committee that I currently work on. And one of the things I took over this year was I sat in our fellowship process for the first time, and it was, no one else is here from AID, right? It was trash. And so we are throwing away our rubric, if you could even loosely call it a rubric, and I'm creating a new rubric that focused on anti-bias and training our faculty on how to interview, how to look for what they need to look for in candidates without their subjectivity that we've had before, and just trying to kind of lay the groundwork for something more equitable and more sustainable. And yeah, I think that's it. So I have a lot of work to do still. I have a lot of work to do in figuring out how I want my role to go forward, which I think is a good thing. And so I hope to learn from the other panelists and also the rest of you here who are kind of doing this change and learning right now, and teaching us how to better guide the future. So I'll stop for now before I start going into a coughing fit.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hussein. It was great to hear about your vulnerability work, and then also just to hear about kind of your contributions now moving forward for the fellowship program for ID. I'm sure that they're very lucky to have you, and same with the medical students. Our next panelist is Dr. David Horn. Dr. Horn is an associate professor within the Division of Pulmonary Critical Care and Sleep Medicine. Dr. Horn is a physician scientist who's engaged in TB-related studies, including transmission and TB screening. You may see Dr. Horn attending on the inpatient critical care services, including the MICU and the NCCS. And so I'd like to take this time to welcome Dr. Horn and invite him to speak.
Thank you for having me today. I have, just to start off, a few comments and then one request. The request is, can you remove that picture of me? I think I had too much coffee that day. The comments are, first of all, I want to thank everyone for just sharing such special stories. I want to thank the organizers for maintaining research as a viable pathway for all medicine residents, and in particular underrepresented individuals. And then thirdly, the challenges here are even reflected tenfold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold in society, most recently as demonstrated in Buffalo. So I'm an associate professor in pulmonary critical care medicine. I have a general pulmonary clinic in addition to attending the neuro ICU. And I have a clinical and research interest in tuberculosis. So my parents, like many of the guests today, were immigrants. My mother from Jamaica, my father from Wales, and they were both nurses. I grew up in the Chicago suburbs, in a predominantly white suburb. And so I spent much of my life feeling like an outsider. That was not the case, however, when I would go and visit my mother's family that lived in Fort Lauderdale in a primarily West Indian community. So, at that point in my life, Florida felt normal. I can't say the same now. So I graduated and went to college, and initially I wasn't sure what I was going to do. But I did know, and I'd been inspired in part by my father. He always believed in helping others, and he had died when I was a ninth grader in high school. And so I had an interest in doing work in international development, and I talked to this agricultural economist, and he said, well, you can either do agricultural economics, and he kind of did not recommend that, or think about medicine. And I thought more about medicine, and it started to appeal to me. Prior to going to medical school, I spent a couple of years at the US Environmental Protection Agency, but what the plan was to go to medical school. I went through medical school, residency in the Northeast, and then came to the University of Washington for fellowship in pulmonary and critical care medicine. I was fortunate. I obtained a K-23 to do TB research locally at the TB control program. And then after about a 3-year gap, I ultimately got an R01, which I have now, to do TB research in Nairobi, Kenya. And so I'm pleased with where I've ended up. But, like Johnny sort of stated, I didn't really have a lot of guidance. At times I didn't feel like I knew the rules of the game, or maybe I didn't know what the next steps were. And so I would strongly encourage anyone who's interested in whatever pathway they're interested in to seek some form of mentorship. I recently was at our ATS, American Thoracic Society conference, and I met with one of our former fellows, Jerry Sabogia. He graduated not that long ago. He's Zimbabwean, and he returned. So he's at Tulane now as an assistant professor, and he has a K award. And he did say that, he reflected back and said that sponsorship, he called it sponsorship, but just having someone to sort of say, you know what, Jerry, consider this grant, or consider this, or do you want to work on this publication with me, or consider going in this direction, was hugely important to him and to his early success. And so again, I really just encourage that to anyone who's thinking about doing research. In terms of how I view EDI as part of my professional identity, you can't be a person of color or underrepresented in any respect without it being just a hugely important part of your identity. On the plus side, in pulmonary clinic, when I have a Black patient, they always comment on how nice it is to have someone that looks like them, and that is one of the most rewarding parts of my job, actually. I would say that it's inspired my interest in tuberculosis, which developed when I was a medical student, seeing homeless people in San Francisco that came in with tuberculosis. And so it led me to my choice of sort of research pathways. It's led to my involvement in certain different groups, like Crisis Standards of Care, that was an active triage group during during the heights of the COVID pandemic. I'm on a DEI committee within our division. On the less plus side, it also shapes my identity in terms of I'm one of the few, or perhaps the only ICU attending at Harborview who never wears scrubs. And that's in part because when I wear scrubs, people ask me if I'm the respiratory therapist or if I'm there to take out the garbage. And that's not to put that, those are essential positions at our hospital. It's not to take away from that, but it's more just the assumption and the bias that's implicit or explicit in those comments. So projects that I have going on include these TB studies in Nairobi. The R01 is entering year 3, so there's opportunities there. There is I'm part of a recent TB training center at University of Washington, funded by NIH, called C-Track, which is just getting off the ground now, but there will be opportunities both to connect with different researchers, to access biospecimens, and perhaps even access small grants. So stay tuned for that. And I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Dr. And that was a great story. And it was so nice to hear about your different research projects and how EDI was very informative in developing those moving forward. And also, I think that you look great on the wards and seeing you in your sharp suit. So I'd like to invite our next panelist, Dr. Leo Morales. Dr. Morales is a professor within the Division of General Internal Medicine, the Assistant Dean of the UW School of Medicine, and co-director of the Latino Center for Health. Dr. Morales' interests include community and policy-oriented health equity, including measurement of patient-reported outcomes in diverse populations, and minority health and health disparities research. And so I'd like to invite Dr. Morales to speak next.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's good to be here with you. And it's great to hear all these different stories. And my story is not that different from some of those you've already heard. My family is an immigrant family. I grew up in a Spanish-speaking household here in Seattle. And so I'm also a local story. And my family was among the first my nuclear family was among the first in our larger family to come to the United States. So many of them followed. And I guess, that experience of being new to a country and kind of how making my way through American society has really been fundamental to who I am and everything I do. So, I think very early on in my interest in health, I was drawn to questions around immigration and integration into society, and how that affected individuals' health. And so I would see it as being just kind of a fundamental tenet of or orientation in all of my work. The other thing I'll say is my path is not at all was not a pre-planned. It was kind of a adventure and continues to be that way. So I didn't have the role models, I guess. My parents were not familiar with how things work in this country, and so there was no one to really say, here are the steps you take to become a doctor. In fact, I didn't really consider medicine until I was a senior in college, and someone suggested to me I might consider it, and that led to where I am today. My first step in the direction of health was through public health. That turned out to be hugely influential. I did some work in Mexico. My family is from Bolivia, which is in South America. So for me, it was a learning experience, but really also connecting that part of a Spanish-speaking world to healthcare and healthcare research. I pursued a fairly traditional approach to academics. Although I didn't start that way, I really loved the work I did in public health school. I was really interested in population health research. And so I spent the first probably 20 years of my career after residency pursuing a career in research, doing the independently funded kind of research, getting an R01, getting I heard earlier, a Harold Amos Award. I also received one of those early on. And then I was really drawn to more direct impact. So although I have continued to do research and I continue to do projects that are research-like or policy-oriented, I'm sort of in a hybrid role, and I would say I do administration and research. And very much with the focus on trying to impact health. So the Latino Center for Health is funded by the state legislature, and our orientation is completely to impact local communities. I really like this orientation because unlike the NIH, which has goals which are somewhat related to what happens in local communities, our work is very related to what happens in local communities. So I'm very much involved in community engaged research. I frequently interact with community-based organizations and community health centers in our state. And I use all the research tools I have. And my background is as a health policy researcher. to guide my work. So I wanted to reflect for a moment on some of the comments I heard, which was a lack of mentorship, an unclear understanding of where you're going, being in an environment that doesn't feel like it's one that's made for you or seems to provide you with sort of the guideposts for how to proceed. And when I hear that, and it has been my experience as well, what I realize is that in many ways we are pathfinders. We are exploring new territory. And that's part of the experience, right? What would it be like to journey through a land where it hadn't, no one was there to tell you how to get to the next point? It would be confusing. It would be a struggle. It would be difficult. You would feel at times like, what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? So I think part of all this is leading change. And so all of the individuals that I've heard today have expressed some part of that. And I do think we are at the forefront of changing medicine. And that's probably what it would feel like if you imagine what an explorer might be experiencing. So I want to encourage everyone to keep going. The other thing I'll say is find your North Star. So for me, the North Star is impacting the health communities. For me, that is what matters most. And so I seek to achieve or orient myself towards that goal through any of the work I do, whether it's clinical as a provider in the Latinx Diabetes Clinic, whether it's as a co-director of the Latino Center for Health, or whether it's as an assistant dean in the Office for Healthcare Equity, working on workforce issues and also on quality of care. So, find that North Star, and as long as you're able to orient yourself towards that in your work, I think you will find happiness and satisfaction. And so that would be my parting advice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Morales. It's so wonderful to hear about your commitment to local communities and all the work and effort that you've been putting into it thus far in your career. I would like to invite our next speaker, Dr. Chinonso Opara. Dr. Opara is a fellow within the Division of Cardiology, whose research interests include the intersection of cardiology and global cardiovascular disease. Dr. Opara is a well-respected and beloved former Uyeda internal medicine resident, and so I would like to welcome Dr. Opara to speak.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Okay. Can everyone hear and see me okay? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so good morning. Thank you for the introduction. I was born in Nigeria, and so that's where my family's from. We're from a community in Nigeria called Ache. And when I was a child, my family moved over here to the United States. And so that has really formed a cornerstone of my identity and has really been like Dr. Morales was saying, a North Star for me. Even though we moved to the United States, we have a very deep connection to the community we're from. And I remember even just as a little kid, hearing stories about people, presenting with hypertension from our community, many people dying suddenly with strokes and heart attacks. And I remember, my family being so motivated to do something about this that we founded an organization between my family, so my parents and my aunts and uncles, called Ache Association, where we essentially give back to the community that we're from in Nigeria. And so we've built a school with building wells. And probably one of the more integral parts of the work that we do is we help to provide care that allows people to access healthcare when they otherwise would not be able to afford it. And so seeing my parents' role and my family's role in that, in helping make the community we're from a better place, helping to make the world a better place, has really helped guide me. And so, from that point, I've always seen my parents as my biggest role models. they always, taught us that charity begins at home. So you always have to stay grounded and know where you're from. And if we don't continue to make, the communities we're from a better place, then what do we have to say about the future for our children and our children's children? And so that helped guide me for what I wanted. That was my my main interest for going into medicine, because I want to help people. And that may sound cliche, but that has been my Northern Star. How can we help other people? How can we make the world a little bit of a better place than it is now? Because if we, how can we give more to the world than we take from it? And so really that has been my, my interest. And so going through med school, a lot of my my projects have been around global health. How can we use and how can we learn about gathering data and implementation of that data to to demonstrate people what is working, like what are the gaps in care, what are the gaps in implementation from from what we know that works, and what are the gaps and what can we help with addressing those gaps. And so through med school, I've been working with through med school, through residency, and now in fellowship, I've been working with Dr. Watkins and Dr. Longnecker in a lot of global health projects to address global cardiovascular disease, and particularly in Africa. And kind of pairing those research interests, I'm also very much interested in the service aspect of it. How can we also deliver care to people now that really need it right now? And so in terms of my role as a Black man in cardiology, I think that is a very, we don't have days to talk about it now, but I think it's a very deep, it's a very, very deep topic. It has influenced a lot of my professional decisions, just even as far as which place do I choose for continuity clinic. So for example, I was an international clinic for my continuity clinic, and I stayed at Harborview for continuity clinic, although I could have gone to other places, but I recognize the importance of seeing, of patients of color, seeing another patient of color, and that has made a huge impact. Just one story I have is I had on the inpatient wards, I was in the cath lab just at Harborview. I had a patient who needed a diagnostic coronary angiogram, right? And so I go to the patient's room to to consent her, and she says that she's not going anywhere unless her daughter comes in and makes an okay for everything. So I sat down, I was like, okay, so let me see where she's coming from. So a couple more days passed, we're trying to get her diagnostic angiogram, right? And so I talk to her daughter, and we really, it makes us think about like, what is it, why is she saying that she wants her daughter to be there? Why is she saying, it comes down to trust of the healthcare system. So as people of color, what can we do to help people gain trust in the healthcare system? And that really comes down to listening, and to listening to, to what their reasons are for their decisions in their care. So it took a couple of days to get the process going, but eventually I was able to talk with a patient, with her daughter in the room. Right, we were able to arrange for an in-person Somali interpreter to wear lead inside the cath lab there. So we made sure that we set the stage right for her to get what we think is a very basic procedure, but to her it's a major step, and something that we really need to work to gain the trust of people. So I'm not gonna steal the air. I know that we have some other time to go through, but really a lot of my my focus has been on how can we give more back to the world than we take from it, and how can we help those who are in more disadvantaged situations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cabrera, for that personal story with the patient. And also just, it's great to hear your childhood and family influence and how that impacted your professional interests in cardiology and your own personal choices. I'd like to introduce our last panelist, Dr. Rashmi Sharma. Dr. Sharma is an assistant professor within the Division of General Internal Medicine and Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for the Uyeda Medicine Cambria Palliative Care Center of Excellence. Dr. Sharma is a palliative care physician and health services researcher whose research focuses on improving care of patients with serious illness and their families with a focus on culturally and linguistically diverse communities. And so I'd like to welcome Dr. Sharma to speak.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and also just really valued hearing everyone's stories. And I think it's just amazing that you've all put together this forum. So kudos to all the hard work that probably went into planning this. So in terms of my backstory, again, echoing kind of the immigrant theme that many others have talked about, my parents immigrated from India in the 1970s. I was born here. I grew up actually in the Seattle area. And I would say, you know, I grew up in a pretty like tight-knit, small at that time, South Asian community here. I had a really strong sense of kind of my identity as an Indian American, and then that kind of expanded to kind of a South Asian identity and Asian American identity, and that really built up through college. So I went away to Northwestern for undergrad and was really active in our Asian American Student Association. And at that time, this is the late 1990s, there was actually a lot of activism that was going on around the creation of an Asian American Studies program. And it took years for us to finally be able to like hire a faculty member to kind of start to launch that program. And so I think that period of time for me, that kind of feeling of advocacy and activism was kind of a really strong part of who I saw myself. But I'll say that when I then went to medical school, which I came back to the University of Washington for medical school, I kind of felt like I had to shelve that part of myself. And so I think at that time, I didn't really understand or see a path to be able to think about any of those issues in the context of medicine. And so went through medical school, did internal medicine residency here at the UW. During actually my Harborview MICU months, kind of realized that I really wanted to do palliative care as a clinical focus, and also felt that there just really wasn't much in the way of kind of research and evidence for thinking about the role of race, ethnicity, culture, gender on the care of patients with serious illness, and in particular in communication in the clinical setting. And thought I might like research, but I really had no background at all. I had, you know, kind of tried to do like a systematic review as a resident, couldn't complete it, didn't have time, like really was very green in terms of research. And so decided to do a general internal medicine fellowship to gain the skills and to figure out if research was really something that I wanted to do. And that was a 3-year fellowship that was out at Hopkins. And that time, during that fellowship, I think I realized, one, that I loved research and clinical research, and it was definitely the pathway for me. And during that time, I had a chance to do a project looking at kind of South Asian attitudes about end-of-life care. And the idea of being able to, you know, tap back into that kind of Asian American identity and focus from many years prior was really exciting for me. I joined faculty at Northwestern and kind of went through the next set of steps that one has to go through in terms of trying to be a physician scientist, which was getting first an institutional K award and then getting an American Cancer Society Career Development Award. And while I was able to focus my research in the area of disparities and inequities in the context of palliative care, you know, I think was told many times by many people that Asian Americans, it was fine to like do a paper kind of, you know, looking at the Asian American population, but like it was really not going to be sustainable to build an actual research career with that population in mind. And so it's actually taken me, I think, many years to be able to finally get to focus on some of those populations. And so with my ACS award, was able to actually come back to the UW and create a faculty position here. And then currently have 2 large grants. And I'm actually going to do a shameless plug because I would love to have trainees who might be interested in looking for a research opportunity. So I'm going to say something about these 2 studies, and then I'm going to come back to these issues around equity. So the 2 projects are focused on barriers to palliative care for patients with limited English proficiency. So the first study is Latinx, Chinese, and Vietnamese older adults with dementia. And then the second study is actually based on the language groups for the Harborview CCM program. So we're looking at patients with advanced cancer who speak Spanish, Amharic, Somali, Vietnamese, or Cambodian. And those studies will use EHR data to kind of examine inequities, and then we'll be doing qualitative interviews with patients, family members, clinicians, interpreters, and then leaders of community-based organizations. So anyone who has an interest in any of those populations, and again, thinking about, either dementia or advanced cancer, please reach out to me because I'd love to involve folks with those opportunities. So that was just kind of, I think, an aside there. So, I think as I reflect on some of what other folks have, so that was my path, right? To finally kind of going in a circle of wanting to figure out how to incorporate this kind of like strong feeling around advocating, particularly for the Asian American community, and figuring out how to do that through my own clinical research and thinking about that in a clinical setting. I wanted to raise the issue of gender because I think that, my perspective is shaped both by, kind of that racialized identity as well as being a woman. And, as I was reflecting on mentors and sponsors, while I have had many amazing mentors, when I think about those who have done sponsorship, it's really, at least for me, been female faculty members. And so, I think as we think about how to create your path forward and how to do the work that you want to do, I think there's a lot that as a system needs to change as we think about both the gender inequities as well as, kind of racial inequities in faculty development and in career development. So, I just want to say that as I think about my own experiences and the kind of bumpy road to get here, it's been a mix of those. I think I'll just get back to, in my kind of final comment, something that Crystal talked about, which was kind of the role of one's lived experience. And this came up in other folks' comments as well. I think it is an amazing thing to be able to bring your whole self to your work. And I would really encourage you all to think about doing that and to find a way to do that. And I'll say that when I'm doing this research now with immigrant communities, and we have a community advisory board, and it's one of the first times that I feel like I am the right person to be doing this research, because I bring a lens that is really needed to understand these issues and think about these populations. And so, lean into who you are. I think medicine tries to take who you are out of you and create this, very objective person who, you check your emotions at the door, you check your identity at the door. And I really hope we can kind of dismantle that. Like, you're a better physician because of who you are. And so I would just really encourage people to kind of lean into that and to recognize all the strengths that you bring because of the experiences that you've had.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Sharma, for that importance of bringing the whole you into your work as a physician and highlighting the importance of women in medicine overall. And hopefully we can recruit some residents to join you in this important work that you're doing as well. And I'd like to talk about the next part of our presentation, which will be time for break. It looks like it is 10:13 right now. So if we could do maybe like a 5-minute break, or 10:14 now, and then just come back as a group, and then we will then split off into the different breakout rooms.
That sounds great, Gabby. Yeah, I think that there is some flexibility built into this session. And I just want to say personally that I'm incredibly humbled and inspired by all of the stories that our panelists have shared. It's honestly makes me really emotional just to hear all of your individual journeys. And I echo those themes of feeling lost in this vast field of medicine and not sure who your mentors are, who your people are. And it's been really inspiring to hear everything that you all have shared. So we'll go to a break. I agree with Gabby. Let's maybe take about 5 minutes and we'll plan to come back by 10:19, 10:20, or sorry, 9:19, or sorry, I'm an hour ahead of everyone in Montana right now. We'll come back around 10:20. We'll break into small groups. And what I'm going to do is sort of tab over to just our panelist photos again. Residents, while you're on break, just sort of reflect on the stories that you've heard. Think about things that really resonated with you, questions that you may have. Perhaps there's someone in a field of interest for you or someone that's doing research in an area that's interesting to you. And then residents will be able to select breakout rooms that they can join when we resume. And panelists and RDC members, maybe you all can stick around while we're on break, just so we can talk through the logistics of the breakout rooms a little bit.
Yes, I can see your screen.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for participating in our breakout rooms. We have reached the end of our mentorship panel today. I want to just reiterate how grateful I am to have our 8 panelists take time out of their busy schedules to come into this group experience, share really personal stories, struggles they've had, barriers they've overcome. It's really inspiring to know where you are today and the great work that you continue to do. So I'm just really thankful that we were able to create this space. And I do hope that it provides the opportunity for residents to continue to think about what mentorship means to us, how that definition may change or morph or grow throughout our training. And also potentially help us foster connections with either the people that you've heard from today, or maybe help get you connected in a secondary way with other people in a similar field of interest. And so just to sort of tab over to our last slide here, I do have the contact information for our panelists today. I have our RDC email in case you have any questions for our RDC members, and then the names and emails of our panelists who are able to join us today. I think that's all that I have to say. Gabby or others, if there's anything else you'd like to add, feel free to do so.
Yeah, again, I just want to echo everybody for being a part of this like really special RDC hosted academic half day. And again, echo the sincere gratitude to our panelists for being here. I think it's been a great discussion highlighting the importance of the current work and like the realm of EDI and the impact on like personal and professional development. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who is involved. And I hope that it's been really important learning experience for everybody and just at least refreshed you in terms of like it's a different, not like a didactic, it's like a different type of academic half day, and you feel like you're inspired and ready to do more work to change the world.
And I'm reading through the chat, which is also filled with gratitude and thanks for everyone for being here. So thank you all again. Maybe Nina or Javel, you can instruct us on our next steps in terms of transitioning over to the next topic for the morning.
Yeah,